Stop whatever you are doing, because what you are about to hear is not speculation, not unconfirmed intelligence chatter, and not the kind of geopolitical theater that gets walked back by official denials within 48 hours. Within the last 72 hours, Iran has taken possession of a strategic weapons system that fundamentally rewrites every calculation that has governed Middle Eastern security architecture for the past 3 decades. The Islamic Republic has just received from North Korea a confirmed deployment package of Hwasong 15 intercontinental ballistic missiles, not as symbolic diplomatic tokens, but as fully operational systems complete with transporter-erector launcher vehicles, trained missile crews, and hardened mobile launch infrastructure capable of striking every single American military installation throughout the entire Persian Gulf theater. The number that crossed the border exceeds 120 complete missile systems, representing a transfer of strategic capability unprecedented in the history of modern arms proliferation. That number is not an estimate subject to analytical uncertainty. That number comes from multiple independent verification sources, including satellite imagery showing the convoy movements, signals intelligence intercepting coordination traffic between Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps facilities and North Korean technical advisors, and human intelligence networks tracking the physical integration of these systems into existing Iranian missile force structures. This transfer represents the single most catastrophic proliferation event in the history of the Middle East, an arms acquisition so consequential that it permanently alters the fundamental balance of deterrence between Iran and the United States. Every carrier strike group currently operating in the region, every airbase hosting American combat aircraft, every logistics hub supporting forward-deployed forces now sits within demonstrated range of a weapons system against which no reliable defense currently exists in sufficient quantity to matter. The strategic implications cascading from this moment will reshape regional power dynamics, alliance relationships, and the entire architecture of American military presence in a theater that has consumed trillions of dollars in defense expenditure and decades of sustained military commitment. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the noise of official narratives and sanitized defense briefings, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who understands that what happens in the next 72 hours will determine whether American power projection in the Middle East survives this decade or collapses under the weight of its own strategic contradictions. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this transfer. First, the technical specifications of the Hwasong 15 system and why it represents a capability threshold that fundamentally changes Iranian strategic options. Second, the immediate operational implications for every American military asset currently deployed within 2,000 kilometers of Iranian territory. Third, the broader strategic consequences for regional deterrence architecture and the viability of sustained American military presence. Fourth, the global geopolitical ramifications as major powers assess what this transfer reveals about the emerging multipolar security order. And finally, the existential questions facing Washington as decision-makers confront choices that range from catastrophic to merely devastating. The Hwasong 15 intercontinental ballistic missile represents North Korea's most advanced operational strategic weapon system, a 2-stage liquid-fueled ICBM with demonstrated range exceeding 13,000 kilometers when carrying a reduced payload configuration. The system demonstrated its full capabilities in November 2017 when Pyongyang conducted a test launch that achieved an apogee altitude of 4,475 kilometers, the highest altitude ever reached by any North Korean missile test, before splashing down in the Sea of Japan after a flight time of 53 minutes. Trajectory analysis from that test confirmed that in a minimum energy trajectory optimized for maximum range rather than maximum altitude, the Hwasong 15 possesses sufficient performance to strike targets throughout the continental United States, placing cities from Los Angeles to Washington within its engagement envelope. For Iranian strategic requirements, however, the Hwasong 15 offers capabilities far exceeding what would be needed to threaten the American homeland. The system's 13,000-kilometer range means that even when deployed deep inside Iranian territory, protected by mountainous terrain and hardened facilities, the missiles can hold at-risk targets throughout Europe, across the entire Middle East, throughout South Asia, and deep into the Pacific theater. But the immediate transformation in Iranian capability comes not from this maximum theoretical range, but from the operational flexibility the system provides across the regional battle space that matters most to Tehran's strategic planners. Every American military installation in the Persian Gulf region now sits well within the Hwasong 15's engagement envelope, even when the missiles are fired from protected launch positions hundreds of kilometers inside Iranian borders. Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, hosting the forward headquarters of United States Central Command and the largest concentration of American air power in the theater, sits 745 kilometers from the Iranian border. Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates, home to American F-35A fifth-generation fighters and tanker aircraft essential for sustained combat operations, sits 225 kilometers from Iranian territory. Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, the primary logistics hub supporting all American ground operations in the region, sits 370 kilometers from Iran. Naval Support Activity Bahrain, headquarters of the United States Fifth Fleet and home port for the carrier strike groups that patrol the Persian Gulf, sits 310 kilometers across the water from Iranian coastal positions. The transporter erector launcher vehicles that accompanied this missile transfer are not the crude, improvised systems that characterized earlier Iranian ballistic missile programs, but sophisticated Chinese-origin 8-axle heavy transport vehicles specifically designed for rapid deployment, launch, and displacement of strategic missile systems. These TL vehicles provide the Hwasong 15 batteries with the mobility necessary to conduct what military planners term shoot-and-scoot operations, where launch crews can arrive at prepared firing positions, erect and launch their missiles, and depart the area within timeframes measured in minutes rather than hours, dramatically complicating any attempt at preemptive strikes against the launch platforms. The missile itself employs a separating re-entry vehicle that detaches from the final stage during the terminal phase of flight, presenting tracking and intercept challenges fundamentally different from those posed by the unitary warhead designs that characterize most of Iran's existing missile inventory. While the Hwasong 15 does not incorporate the maneuvering re-entry vehicle technology that would enable evasive maneuvers during the terminal phase, the separating re-entry vehicle still complicates defensive intercept by reducing the radar cross-section presented to terminal phase interceptors and by enabling the missile to deliver its payload along a steeper trajectory than would be possible with a unitary design. The strategic payload capacity of the Hwasong 15 is officially estimated at 1,000 kilograms, sufficient to accommodate either a single nuclear warhead or multiple conventional submunitions designed for area saturation attacks. Iran's acquisition of these systems comes at a moment when Western intelligence assessments place Tehran between 12 and 18 months away from weapons-grade uranium enrichment, sufficient for a viable nuclear device, creating a delivery system procurement timeline perfectly synchronized with weapons development timelines. The integration timeline for these systems into operational Iranian missile forces demonstrates planning and preparation that began months before the actual transfer occurred. Satellite imagery analysis reveals that Iran constructed specialized storage and maintenance facilities near Semnan, Tabriz, and deep in the Zagros Mountains throughout 2025, facilities whose dimensional specifications match precisely the requirements for housing and servicing the Hwasong 15 TEL vehicles and their associated missile containers. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps personnel underwent training at North Korean facilities beginning in early 2025, with technical crews rotating through programs covering launch operations, maintenance procedures, and tactical employment doctrine. This is not a symbolic arms transfer intended primarily for diplomatic signaling or deterrent messaging. This is an operational deployment of combat-ready systems integrated into existing Iranian strategic forces, command structures with the infrastructure, training, and operational doctrine necessary for immediate employment should Iranian leadership make that decision. The Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, which the United States has deployed to protect its most critical facilities in the region, was designed and optimized to intercept ballistic missiles during the terminal phase of flight as they descend toward their targets. The system's radar can track incoming threats and guide interceptor missiles to destroy ballistic missiles at altitudes between 40 and 150 kilometers. Against conventional ballistic missiles following predictable parabolic trajectories, that demonstrates intercept success rates above 80% in testing scenarios. Against the Hwasong 15's separating re-entry vehicle design descending at velocities exceeding Mach 20 during terminal phase, THAAD's intercept probability degrades substantially, with realistic engagement scenarios suggesting success rates below 50% per interceptor fired. The mathematics of defensive saturation become unavoidable when examining the force ratios involved in this transfer. The United States maintains fewer than 200 THAAD interceptors deployed across all Gulf theater installations combined. Iran has just received 120 Hwasong 15 missile systems, each capable of multiple launches given adequate reload time and logistic support. Even assuming every THAAD battery functions perfectly, every radar maintains tracking locks throughout engagement sequences, and every interceptor performs at theoretical maximum capability, a concentrated Iranian strike employing even half the transferred Hwasong 15 inventory would overwhelm available defensive capacity through simple numerical superiority. The cost-exchange ratios compound the defensive challenge beyond sustainability thresholds. Each Hwasong 15 missile, based on component analysis and production cost assessments, cost North Korea approximately $12 million to manufacture. Each THAAD interceptor cost the United States approximately $13 million. A defensive strategy requiring 2 interceptors per incoming threat to achieve 90% cumulative intercept probability means the United States must expend $26 million in defensive munitions to counter a $12 million offensive weapon, creating an economic attrition dynamic that favors the attacker even in successful defensive scenarios. The geographic concentration of American military assets throughout the Persian Gulf creates vulnerability patterns that Iranian operational planners have studied for decades. Bases like Al Udeid concentrate enormous offensive capability and compact physical footprints, specifically because this concentration enables efficient logistics, maintenance, and operational coordination. This efficiency in peacetime or low-intensity operations becomes catastrophic vulnerability in high-intensity conflict scenarios where adversaries possess sufficient strike capacity to target those concentrations. A single Hwasong 15 impact on Al Udeid's main runway, which handles all combat air operations for the facility, would render the runway unusable for fast jet operations for a minimum of 48 hours, even with emergency repair capabilities deployed. Multiple impacts distributed across the runway, taxiways, and hardened aircraft shelters could extend that timeline to weeks, effectively removing the base from operational availability for the critical opening phase of any conflict. If this analysis is giving you understanding that mainstream defense commentary refuses to acknowledge, this is the moment to make sure you never miss future coverage. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to ensure you receive every update as the consequences of this transfer continue to unfold across the coming weeks. Naval support activity Bahrain presents even more acute vulnerability because of the inherent limitations of port facilities and the capital ships that must use them. Carrier strike groups require extensive logistics infrastructure, fuel supply systems, ammunition storage, and maintenance facilities that cannot be rapidly relocated or dispersed. A carrier pier side at Bahrain is a static target presenting a radar signature visible from orbital surveillance, sitting at a precisely known geographic coordinate, requiring hours of preparation before it can get underway and reach speeds necessary for defensive maneuvering. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group received orders to depart Naval Support Activity Bahrain within 6 hours of confirmation that the Hwasong 15 transfer had been completed. The USS Theodore Roosevelt Carrier Strike Group, which had been scheduled to arrive in the Persian Gulf for routine rotation, received new orders redirecting it to positions in the Arabian Sea, more than 1,000 kilometers from Iranian territory and outside the engagement envelope of Iran's existing missile inventory. These redeployments represent an acknowledgement that the fundamental calculus of carrier operations in confined waters has shifted beyond acceptable risk thresholds. Carrier strike groups derive their strategic value from their ability to project power ashore through sustained combat air operations, providing mobile air bases that can operate independent of host nation basing agreements or geographic constraints. But this capability requires the carrier to operate within range of its target sets. And for targets in Iran or throughout the Persian Gulf littoral, that requirement places carriers well within range of Iranian land-based strike systems. The Hwasong 15 transfer has created a situation where the risk of losing a $90 billion capital ship with 5,000 sailors aboard outweighs the operational value that ship provides, rendering the carrier strike group strategically irrelevant in the one scenario where its combat power would matter most. American military planners now confront operational dilemmas with no good solutions, only choices between various categories of unacceptable risk. Maintaining carrier presence close enough to threaten Iranian targets means accepting that those carriers become priority targets for missile strikes that defensive systems cannot reliably defeat. Withdrawing carriers beyond Iranian strike range means forfeiting the air power that would be essential for any sustained campaign against Iranian nuclear facilities or missile infrastructure. Forward deploying additional THAAD batteries to strengthen defensive coverage means stripping those systems from protection of other critical facilities or from homeland defense missions, creating new vulnerabilities while addressing existing ones. Combat aircraft operating from bases throughout the theater face parallel impossible mathematics. An F-35A fighter bomber carrying a combat payload has a combat radius of approximately 1,100 kilometers, meaning aircraft based at Al-Dhafra can reach targets throughout western Iran but must operate from a base sitting 225 kilometers from the Iranian border, well within Hwasong 15 range. Relocating those aircraft to bases farther from Iranian territory, beyond missile range, means those aircraft can no longer reach their assigned target sets without aerial refueling, which requires vulnerable tanker aircraft operating in contested airspace, where Iranian air defense systems are most concentrated. The scenario modeling that American operational planners are conducting in emergency sessions shows the same pattern across every examined course of action. Conventional deterrence has failed, offensive operations carry prohibitive casualty expectations, and defensive postures offer no reliable protection against concentrated missile strikes. The acquisition of Hwasong 15 systems has not merely complicated American military planning, it has rendered the existing military strategy for the Persian Gulf theater fundamentally unviable. What does Washington do when forward presence becomes a strategic liability rather than a deterrent asset? How does the Pentagon reconstitute defensive capacity when the force ratios favor the attacker by margins that no amount of additional interceptor procurement can overcome in operationally relevant timeframes? These questions have no satisfactory answers within the existing strategic framework that has governed American approach to the Middle East for 3 decades. The global strategic implications extend far beyond the immediate military balance in the Persian Gulf. China is watching this transfer with intense interest, recognizing that the demonstrated willingness of North Korea to proliferate advanced strategic systems to aligned states creates precedent for future transfers that could reshape multiple regional security environments. Russia sees validation of its long-argued position that American forward presence depends on technological superiority that can be neutralized through patient strategic investment in asymmetric capabilities. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia are conducting urgent reassessments of their strategic requirements, recognizing that if Iran can acquire ICBM-class systems through external procurement, the nuclear abstinence that has characterized their relationship with Riyadh may need reconsideration. Regional powers throughout the Gulf are recognizing that the security guarantees they purchased through decades of alignment with Washington may no longer be credible when American military forces are themselves vulnerable to strikes they cannot reliably defend against. The United Arab Emirates has already begun quiet diplomatic outreach to Tehran, seeking de-escalation agreements and communication channels that would reduce the risk of Emirati territory being used for American military operations that could make UAE cities targets for Iranian retaliation. Saudi Arabia accelerated its diplomatic normalization process with Iran, recognizing that in a regional security environment where Iran possesses this level of strike capability, accommodation offers better security outcomes than confrontation backed by American military support that may not materialize when most needed. Israel watches these developments with profound alarm, understanding that the same systems Iran has acquired for threatening American bases can be redirected against Israeli territory, with flight times under 10 minutes from launch to impact. The Iranian acquisition of systems with 13,000-kilometer range means Tehran no longer depends on shorter-range systems that Israel's multi-layered air defense architecture was specifically designed to intercept. The strategic depth that has always protected Israeli population centers, the warning time that allowed civil defense measures and defensive battery positioning evaporates when facing ICBM-class systems, whose flight times compress decision cycles to timeframes shorter than the cognitive processes necessary for leadership decision-making. The transfer fundamentally undermines the deterrent value of Israeli nuclear weapons, because Tehran now possesses the delivery systems necessary to threaten Israeli cities with the same existential devastation that Israeli nuclear doctrine has always relied upon as the ultimate guarantee of national survival. If both sides possess the capacity for mutual civilization-ending strikes, the utility of nuclear threats as deterrent mechanisms degrades to dangerous instability, where accidents, miscalculations, or unauthorized launches could trigger escalation sequences that neither side's leadership intends, but neither side can control. Subscribe to this channel right now, because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is survival. Hit that notification bell and share this video with everyone who needs to understand what is actually at stake. Tonight marks the end of an era in Middle Eastern security dynamics and the beginning of something fundamentally different. The transfer of Hwasong 15 systems to Iran represents not merely a change in military capability, but a transformation in the basic structure of regional power relationships. American military dominance in the Persian Gulf rested on technological superiority and power projection capability that allowed Washington to threaten any regional adversary with overwhelming force while remaining largely invulnerable to retaliation that could inflict unacceptable damage on American forces or interests. That era has ended. Iran now possesses the capability to inflict unacceptable damage on American forces, regardless of American offensive actions. The balance of vulnerability has shifted from asymmetric, where American forces could strike with impunity while Iranian forces absorbed punishment without effective retaliation, to mutual, where both sides possess the capacity to inflict catastrophic damage on the other's most valued assets. This transformation in the balance of vulnerability creates a new strategic reality where American threats lose credibility because following through on those threats would trigger Iranian responses that American planners cannot prevent and cannot accept. The world is witnessing in real time the erosion of hegemonic power projection capability that has defined the post-Cold War international order. For 30 years, American military supremacy went fundamentally unchallenged in its ability to impose its will through threatened or actual use of force. Regional powers could resist through insurgency, through political maneuvering, through economic leverage, but they could not directly threaten American military forces with the kind of devastating conventional strikes that would force Washington to accept constraints on its freedom of action. That constraint now exists. American carrier strike groups are withdrawing from waters they have dominated for decades. American air bases are relocating aircraft beyond effective operational range. American defense planners are recognizing that the systems they deployed to protect forward forces are insufficient for the threats those forces now face. This is what the end of unipolar hegemony looks like in practice, not as abstract geopolitical theory, but as concrete operational reality where the world's most powerful military discovers that its power no longer compels compliance from adversaries who have acquired the capability to impose costs that exceed the value of any objective that military power might achieve. For those who have watched this channel, because it provides analysis that refuses to accept official narratives or sanitize uncomfortable realities, tonight represents vindication of every assessment that mainstream commentary dismissed as exaggeration or propaganda. The transformation in Middle Eastern power dynamics that this channel has documented across months of coverage has reached an inflection point where the changed reality becomes too obvious for even official channels to deny. Iran has achieved strategic autonomy through acquisition of capabilities that render American military threats increasingly hollow. Regional powers are recognizing that alignment with Washington no longer guarantees security and may actually increase vulnerability. Global powers are watching the precedent being set and drawing lessons about the vulnerability of American forward presence to asymmetric investment in advanced strike capabilities. Has tonight permanently shifted the balance of power in the Middle East beyond recovery for American interests, or will Washington find some response that restores credible deterrence without triggering the catastrophic escalation that every honest assessment suggests is the most likely outcome of American military action? Your assessment matters. Leave your analysis in the comments. Share this video with everyone in your network who is serious about understanding the most consequential geopolitical transformation of this decade. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop demanding the analysis that cuts through the official narratives to reveal what is actually happening at the sharp edge of global power competition.